As always, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's always lovely to have all of you here, all the new brethren participating, and all the familiar faces. As always, we'll start with some important housekeeping rules. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted onto our YouTube channel, so if you do not wish to be seen, please switch your cameras off. To avoid any disruptions during the talk, we'd also like you to keep your microphones off and on mute throughout the meeting. And the chat will be also turned off. There will be the usual Q&A session after the talk. And if you'd like to ask today's speaker a question, use the hands up icon, which can be found in the participants reaction tab on Zoom. Once you've done this, please wait for your name to be called out. You may then unmute yourself, ask your question, but please do not forget to mute yourself again. To save your spot in the queue, you can do this at any time during the talk. I'd also like to remind the brethren to please keep to questions, no commentary, so we can avoid making any statements or anything that will cramp up the talk and increase time. As is customary, we'll be giving our two of our bespoke mugs at our usual mini contest. And for a chance to win, please answer this following question. Which year did the union of the two Grand Lodges of England occur, and who was the first Grand Master? Not his name, his title.
The chat is disabled.
Yes, we will enable it right now. Hold on. Sorry. Okay, Mahir, how do we enable it? Sorry?
Can you repeat that again? Sorry, you cut off.
How do we enable the chat?
Chat, yes, is enabled.
Okay, okay.
Sorry.
Brethren, you can respond to the question asked. Okay, we have some correct answers. Thank you. Now, I'd like to introduce our Right Worshipful Brother John Meek, who will be giving the lecture tonight. In craft, he is a past master of DC Craigier Lodge number 81 from the Grand Lodge of Illinois, and he's also an honorary member of Jonesboro Lodge number 111. He is the Grand Representative to Bulgaria and Russia. He has received the Lodge Builder Award in the United Grand Lodge of Bulgaria. The progressive orders he participates in are Mark, the Holy Royal Arch, Knights Templar, the Royal Order of Scotland, SRIA, Widow's Sons, and the Order of the Sword of Bunker Hill. As a Masonic speaker, he's given physical lectures in Bulgaria, Italy, and the US, while during lockdown, he's been quite busy with giving Zoom talks. So John, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and the floor is yours.
Can I unmute myself too?
I think so, yeah. We will be needing that.
One piece of housekeeping on my side, please. I still haven't figured out everything in Zoom, so Terry, would you please be the one to get the hands raised? Because I don't know how to do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we have that. We're going to be helping you with that, so don't worry about it. Okay.
All right, since I've already been introduced, I'll roll right into it. Good evening to everyone. Thanks for coming. And tonight's talk is, man, I sound like Jay Leno. Tonight's topic is, tonight's talk is a holistic approach to Freemasonry. What got me rolling on this idea was when I was a young Mason. When I joined, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, first thing that you notice when you walk in is there's guys missing. You know, you go to your degree, there's a bunch of guys at your degree. Okay, fine. But when you start going to the regular stated meetings, there aren't as many. And then you start seeing after a while a certain attrition rate. And I got thinking, why? You know, what if you're having an attrition rate, something's got to be going wrong. Okay. So I wrote the first version of this book. Then I moved overseas, so to speak, and saw the other side of Masonry, how everybody else is doing it. Because, you know, when you're in a larger country, you can go from one state or province to the next, and, you know, there's not a whole lot of variation, at least in the US, there isn't. And so you kind of get that feeling that, oh, this is how it goes on. And so when I moved over here, I learned real quick that's exactly not how it works. There's a lot of variation out there. So I rewrote this thing almost from the ground up. And the point is how do we get good guys, and how do we keep good guys, and how do we keep the lodge rolling? And so thinking about it over the years, it's like, well, there's got to be a way to do this. And instead of breaking this off into little pieces, why don't we approach it as a whole? Because yeah, it's one thing to get a guy and it's another thing to keep a guy, but sort of, it's actually more like these are two sides of one coin. So this has got to be approached as a single thing. I mean, of course there's steps underneath it, but you know, it's really one thing. And so I broke it down into different topics, hence the book. And so I'm going to be following that book as the guideline here. So what's the basis of what we do, generally speaking? I mean, it's said in different languages in different ways, but it all boils down to brotherly love, relief, and truth. You know, and what do all these come from? Okay, so let's start with the first one in the order, at least the way I learned it. Brotherly love. We love each other as brothers. We signed on for this. This is what we do. How do you show love? Well, you offer relief to each other. Yes, there's the relief that we owe to the world at large, but there's also that brotherly relief that we owe to each other. Brother needs a job. You know, okay, he's my brother. I'm going to help him out. Why not? Brotherly love translate into an action, which is relief. But what do we use to guide ourselves in the proper way of loving each other and expressing this love? Well, the truth, you know, the great trestle board given by the grand architect. So based on this truth, we love each other and we express that by way of relief. These are the tenets, and these are the bare bone basics. But how do we get there? Because this is assuming that we're already there. So we enter through the lodge, but the lodge, you know, there's different contexts of the word. There's the lodges in the lodge hall, the lodge room, the lodge that we belong to, that we tell our wives we go to every Thursday night or whatever. But then there's the lodge, which is us as a corporate body. And that lodge is a sacred place. Why? Because we step outside of the normal world to do something that's particular, that is sacred, to make ourselves better men, to better the world around us, kind of thing. And so we have the sacred space, and it has to be. And that's why we have the, you know, without going into the details, because we are on the internet after all, we have our opening ritual, which brings us up to this sacred space. And then we have the closing down ritual that brings us down to reality, so to speak. Now, what is this sacred space? It's, for lack of a better term, I'm very sorry, I have to go a little bit of Doctor Who here, because some of these topics really are timey-wimey. But it's like you want to call it a mental plane, a spiritual plane, however you want to call it. But there does seem to be, we're raising ourselves up to a separate plane of acting or thinking or whatever you want to call it in order to do this degree work. Okay, and when we're acting on that level, we're building our fraternity, we're building our family, you know. And by building that family, we're building up the spirit, because every organization has a spirit. You know, you walk into a building or whatever, it's like, this is, you know, you get, especially on these old buildings here in Europe, it's like, yeah, you know what, this is a really comfy feeling building. I like this place. Or you have the other extreme, man, this place is creepy as all get out. You know, that's the spirit of the organization you're feeling. Or at least I think it is, but you know. And if you want to put in esoteric terms, that's the egregore. And every time you do, you know, the ritual, and you're building the egregore, and every time we get a new guy in, we're building the egregore. And that's why we have to be very, you know, focus on what we're doing, because we're trying to build up a good egregore. You know, when you walk into a lodge, when we open the lodge, it's a good feeling. You know, oh, it's really great to see the guys again. I'm happy to be here now. Oh man, we're here to pay bills. I can't wait to get out of here and get to dinner afterwards, to get home. I'm done. You know, you want that positive feeling. The only way to have it is have a healthy egregore, and the only way to have a healthy egregore is to treat that sacred space that is our lodge, you know, that we're opening and closing at the end, of course, within that building, of course. And once we understand this, okay, it's a sacred space. So what? You know, where do we? What's the repository of the intellectual knowledge, of, you know, the intellectual and spiritual knowledge? Well, that's where we look towards one groups, but, you know, well, two groups of guys, the philosophical and the esoteric Masons. Esoteric Masonry, at least as I define it, is that spiritual experience that you have when you're doing the ritual, when you're contemplating the symbols, when you're doing all these things. And that's communicated from mentor to student. You know, you got the old past master pulls a new guy and say, hey kid, come here, you see this? Well, that's what this is. Boom, 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 boom. But again, these things are timey-wimey. How do you wrap up these spiritual notions that are, for lack of a better term, mushy? You know, because it's like, well, how do you exactly describe it? Well, we fall back on philosophy. You know, there is an old saying that philosophy is the handmaiden of theology. I think that also serves true for esotericism. Philosophy is the handmaid of esotericism, because we need solid terms to wrap our minds around, to, you know, to quote unquote, until we get to the point where we quote unquote get it, we have to try to understand it. That's what the philosophy does. That's what authors like Arturo Regini, Albert Pike, Mackey, Waite, even the pre-Masonic writers, John Dee, all those, Agrippa, all those guys. Yes, those are esoteric writings, but they're wrapped up in philosophy so that we can read them in a structured way, therefore contemplate them, therefore experience them. So that's the two-part breakdown there. You need both. Now, well, Freemasonry is esoteric at its core. Not everybody's going to understand it. There are wonderful Masons I know that think it's absolute mumbo jumbo, but they somehow get the point behind it. And I think we all know guys like this. So we got our tenets that we approach within a sacred space. And after that, what's this repository? The Masonic esotericism that goes down from mentor to student, but it's also codified in books as in philosophical clothing. Now, this all presumes a tradition. And this also presumes handing it down, because you got the tradition, that's nice, but you got to hand it down somewhere. So we got to have a balancing act. We have to there's certain things that we got to maintain, you know, but then there are ways that we have to communicate it in 21st century and at some point 22nd, 23rd century, guys, you know, as time moves on. So with this insistence that we often hear about maintaining the ritual, maintaining symbols, yes, we absolutely need to do that, because that's what we were handed down from the guys ahead of us 100 or 200, 300, 400 years ago, whichever. And we need to maintain those symbols in order to maintain the purity of teaching. Why? Because if, for example, the compasses, okay, or no, sorry, even better, a plumb one. You know, you can do it with a laser, you can have the old-fashioned one. That plumb has certain teachings attached to it that have just been handed down, built upon for a couple of hundred years. So you're taking those teachings, which are philosophically dressed up esoteric truths, putting them onto one physical symbol. It's got a continuity to it. But if you were to translate that into like one of those laser plumbs, well then, how are you going to do that? you have to make a secondary translation, and you're going to automatically miss something that should have been there in the first place by trying to modernize it. So I propose keep what's old, keep it, absolutely. But how do we pass it on? That's where mentorship, again, comes in. You can explain, well, you see the old tools, this, and this is what it teaches. Now, if you look at it, this is, because we have it on our jewels, this is what it looks like. Now, if you want to think of it in this way, okay, you can do this, 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 but this is still the primary symbol, but this is the modern version. And this is how you pass it down. Taking the timeless truths in the old symbols, but one-to-one, past master to new guy, whatever, mentor to new guy, explaining it in those modern terms so that he can understand it, and then at some point make that jump to the older symbol and then really unpack it. But again, together. So we've talked about symbols, we've talked about repositories, we talked about all these things. Now, how we hand it down, we do it in ritual. We're not the only order that does it, but we have our own way of doing it. Our rituals are how we give the degrees, and that's how we initiate. And that's a whole nother talk on itself, but this is how we do it in a nutshell. Those rituals should be done in a solemn way, and they should be done as close to perfect as we can. Now, that being said, now I'm going to deviate into two things. There are jurisdictions that rely on memory. I started in one. Most, if not all, United States Grand Lodges, you got to memorize stuff. But there's a lot of jurisdictions, and I've noticed in a lot in Europe, where you can read the ritual. You still have the different physical aspects, but you can actually read the ritual. However it's done, those mechanics don't matter. The point is you want to get it as smooth and perfect as possible, always realizing we're not perfect. We're gonna strive, trying to get it perfect. We're not going to get there, of course, but strive for excellence and solemnity in our delivery of the degree, so that the new guy coming in sees this. And when you have that solemn atmosphere, again, it makes it easier to bring that spirit up to establish that sacred space that the lodge is. Okay, because the first degrees that you're going to get, that's the new guy's first impression of Masonry, really. I mean, yeah, they're going to meet us outside, talk to us, whatever, but to really see what the operational methods of Masonry, that first degree is the first thing he's going to see. So there's got to be a certain spirit, there's got to be a certain fluidity, there's got to be a certain excellence to it, because that's going to set a timbre for this guy, whether he realizes it, whether we realize it for that matter or not. That's going to set a timbre for him in a lot of ways of what's going to be coming up. And that brings us to the question, and this is the core really of what we're trying to do. The new guy, who do we bring in? What do we want in him? What are we looking for? There's a lot of good people out there, a lot of good guys. Are they good for Masonry? You can have a perfectly good young man. He'd be great for Rotary. He'd be great for whatever, Knights of Columbus, you name it. He may not be great for us. And then there's a secondary question, which is equally important. Is he good for my lodge in particular? Because Masonry is a family. And even more so, the individual lodge is a family, because I'm going to be seeing him every Thursday or every other Thursday for the rest of my life, So we want to make sure that, number one, is he of good quality? Number two, do we mesh? Does he mesh with my lodge, and does my lodge mesh with him? Because that also, believe it or not, that whole meshing thing contributes to the attrition. It's like, yeah, I was hoping for this or that out of Masonry, but I'm just not clicking here at the lodge. It just ain't working. Okay, well, Is that his fault? Is that our fault? Or is it just a question that, well, we don't click, because like everything else, there's 100 perfectly good lodges right down the block, so to speak. And, and when we're looking at this new guy, that's part of it. Are you good? Are you a good person? Are you a criminal? Are you mean to your wife and kids? Are you a crook? That's the basics. Okay. On top of that, why do you want to be a Mason? Okay, all this is answered properly. And then, okay, when we go back and talk, do we like this guy? I mean, he fits the bill. This is fine, but is he going to hack it in our lodge? Are we going to having him here? Because at some point, once we're done figuring out whether we like him or not, we're going to have to vote in one way, shape, or form to accept him in. And that is where that voting is really, in a lot of ways, the last line of defense we have for bringing in good people. You'll see the discussions going back and forth on whether the vote's a holdover from a past time, just a ritualistic thing, or is it actually important? And I would say it's important because the member that's voting against the guy might not have been there when the report was read. Or, there in cases where you have law enforcement, he might not be able to say anything, but he may have a case where that new guy is involved and he can't say anything, not even to the lodge, for the integrity of the case. And in that way, the vote's anonymous, just vote against him. You did your responsibility. Because once he's in, and it takes a long time to wrap one's head around it. Took me a long time to wrap my head around it. Is once he's in, he's one of ours, okay, which is fine. That's the way it is. That's the way it should be. But there will be brothers that will ask him for help that their lives depend on it, or he'll be visiting halfway around the world because he's one of our brothers in our lodge, and that's what we have to think when we're voting. We're voting actually not for or against him. We're voting really for the integrity for our lodge. That's what the vote is. It's for the lodge. The candidate is there, but it's kind of a secondary thing. So once we get them in, we do have a responsibility to him. Of course, he's got to show some get up and go. I mean, there's no way around it. If he's not going to, again, depending on the jurisdiction, some places want you to write a paper, some places want you to memorize things, some places expect you to visit other lodges and to be a regular attendee at your current lodge. Some places, you're not going to a meeting until you're a third degree, and that's final. Whatever the process of formation of the new Mason is, he absolutely has to do his part and show effort and show some get up and go. However, once we vote him in, he's one of ours. He's our brother. We have a responsibility to make sure he's okay. We got to make sure he's, number one, learning the stuff or doing the research, whatever. But number two, understanding it. Because what's the point of running a guy up 1, 2, and 3 and dropping him? No, I mean, it's some places will do the 1-day thing, but go back and teach the guy, because we owe it to him now. We owe him, because what we teach him, he's going to be teaching the next generation. And that's going to guarantee, that's theoretically going to ensure keeping Masonry going, is that we're teaching him, he's going to teach the next guy, because it's all, I mean, in some ways this boils down to responsibility, brotherly love and responsibility. You're my brother, you're new. Okay, yeah, you gotta pay your dues, gotta do your thing. But I gotta make sure you're coming along. Are you confused? Are you not able? Are you going through a hard time that you're not getting your stuff done? What can I do to help? I mean, if it's a guy who's not doing anything because for whatever reason, lazy or doesn't want to bother, got bored, whatever, they'll fall away. I mean, they just do. But if he's having a bad time and needs help, he may be too embarrassed or scared to ask, because let's face it, number one, a lot of times guys want to impress and show, oh, look, I can do it all by myself. And this, number two, they're just learning about, they may know one or two guys in the lodge, but they don't know the rest of us. So they are they mean? If I ask a question, am I going to get thrown out of here? I don't know. So there's got to be give and take, a dialogue going back and forth between the mentor and the new guy. And that's why mentorship is so important. There's a couple of reasons. Yes, Masonic education is hugely important, and the mentors, whether official or unofficial, play a huge part in the actual lodge education portion. But the mentor also, he's the human interface. And he's the one that's going to pull the kid aside and say, hey, you see that symbol over there? Remember what that lecture was during the degree? Well, yeah. Well, here's another interpretation. Here's a deeper interpretation. He's the one that's going to be teaching that stuff to the kid. Even if it's an unofficial thing, doesn't matter. That's still part of the mentoring process. And that mentoring process is the heart and soul of Masonic education. Yeah, there's some memory work, but who's going to be checking up on the new guy that he's memorizing it, and more importantly, understanding it, or that he's writing his research paper, showing up to his lodge meeting? I mean, that's obvious, but or that who's doing the follow-up, that he's visiting those other lodges in the jurisdictions where that's required. That's part of that mentorship and educational dialogue. And switching gears, we're going to go, now that he's already in, and we've kind of started the education process, there's nuts and bolts stuff here going on. Secrecy. We're in a world of worldwide travel and internet now. Got to teach this guy. You know, of course, you know, every jurisdiction defines secrecy. What secret over here is one thing was different from Illinois. In some cases, in between some jurisdictions, it's night and day. Now, we have to inculcate in the young ones. Look, there's a thing called secrecy. In some countries, that's a no-no word, and say, well, it's discretion, because it's a lot easier to just bypass a couple of things than to have to go through an entire history lesson, number one. And then number two, in some places, it will save you, because there are some places where being a Mason will keep you from getting a job, you know, or in other parts of history, Masonry was banned. In fact, I think there might still be one or two countries out there where Masonry is effectively banned. I mean, here in this country, if I remember right, it was banned for a couple of decades. So that secrecy at one point, and in some places, definitely serves a real good purpose. But then there's the other side of it, that we have our family, it's our stuff, you know, so we have a right to this on top of it all. And moving on, speaking of differences, we're all from different countries, and every country's got its own culture and way of doing things. And Masonry, as it's spread and evolved, has written different rituals for that. I mean, whether it's the good old-fashioned American Preston Webb and derivations, or it's emulation, rectified, Swedish, you name it, Scottish Rite. These are all essentially adaptations to speak to different cultures and times. What I went through the American degrees, which are derivations of Preston Webb. Very, 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 very much simpler than the ritual work I see here in some ways. You know, the wording's a lot simpler. But these are two different, continental Europe is far and away different from the American mindset. So it requires different things. And so with that in mind, we're all going to be doing different things. It's all, the basics are the same. The basics are absolutely the same, but there's different ways. And when we go out and about, we're going to see it blatantly. And to be honest with you, when you go into some of these degrees, like, you know, coming from the American background, some of this barely looks familiar. I mean, there's, you know, you see certain things, but a lot of stuff, it's like, you have no idea. I mean, I always joke around, the first time I saw a German AFAM degree, when the new guy was going through, I knew less. I think it was a second degree actually that I saw the first
Excuse me,
time.
John.
Yes.
We have 5 more minutes to sum up so we can go on to the Q&A section because we have a tight schedule.
You got it. Okay, so keeping in mind those differences, we have to act within a certain amount of charity when we're dealing with each other on the internet. Because what I'm doing over here is definitely not going on in America. So we have to have a certain understanding and compassion. And not only that, speaking of understanding, there's got to be a certain understanding when we're inside the lodge. We all have different qualities, we all have different strengths. And when building the lodge, we have to play to those. I'm good at one thing, Sotiri is good at another thing. So I get one job, he gets the other, without overburdening the new guys. Because if you overburden the new guy, you'll lose them. If you underburden them, you'll lose them too, because they get bored, go off and join any other group that's out there. And so we have to play to these strengths, and then we have to all pull together in one direction. He's doing one thing, I'm doing another thing, but we're all moving in the same direction. But so far, we've only talked about work. What about play? Because we're human beings, we can't do all work and just vote on paying bills and making new Masons. Extracurricular events are desperately needed, whether it's a barbecue, going to a concert, Sotiris, going to a concert, or going to a ball game. Those are all feeding the human side. So we're not just formally brothers, we're brothers and we're friends that we actually know each other as human beings, and we can count on each other, not only in need, which is important, but we can also count on each other emotionally. And that's why these external events are so important. And so with that, moving from the tenants through the election process of the candidate, through the mechanics of working together and playing together, essentially, we have a masonry that's not just bricks, but it's a whole thing. Everything working in concert, again, pulling in one direction. And so, Thierry, back to you.
Thank you so much. John, thank you. It was great talk. You were very informative. And we have a few questions. And I'm sorry for making you like sum it up a bit, but we're in a tight schedule because other people have a lot of Masonic meetings after this one. They have their 7 o'clock meetings in England. So we had to cut it short. So Hoffman, would you like to go first?
United Grand Lodge started the pathway, which is help to recruit and retain members in the lodge. But the problem with the pathway is still thinking of the past. I think they're looking so much for an Olivier and they're forgetting about Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin did 7 films a year. He made you laugh, he made you cry, he didn't speak one word. We're looking for a Mason in the body, but we're not looking for somebody that can act a ceremony or speak or remember a ceremony. And that's where the scary part comes from. I've seen people who's terrified doing the part of the inner guard, shaking. I've seen people who are editors of a newspaper who couldn't even remember his 2 lines. He knew it outside the lodge, but not inside the lodge. I think we put so much pressure on the Mason to perform than to be a Mason. What do you think about that?
In a lot of ways, again, it's a two-edged sword. I worded it badly. Like I said, try to be perfect, bad way to put it. That's why I backpedaled and I said, we should try to go for excellence in smoothness, okay? On the one hand, yes, you do make a good point, no doubt. You know, the interior, to communicate the interior value is the most important part about it. But at the same time, ritual work does have its reasons for being there. That said, any part I ever played in a ritual, there was always one line I forgot every single time. I just got used to it every after a while. It's like, okay, I figured out this is the one line I'm going to blow. I just know. But that didn't mean I didn't try. You know, I kept plugging away at it. Even though I knew I was going to blow it at that one point, I kept trying. And I deliver that one line as best as I could. Even if I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't remember what the right one was, I just plowed through. I mean, usually in America, they have what are called prompters that'll remind you of the line. But if that wasn't caught, I just plow through it and keep going, figuring, okay, I made a mistake. He'll go back and learn. He'll go back and learn the point, because he's going to have to he's going to be learning parts of the ritual anyway. So if that answers your question, they're both important. Yes, of course, the interior stuff's far more important, but we can't completely throw out the importance of ritual either. That's, I mean, it serves a purpose, if that answers your question.
Thank you very much.
Simon Reeder.
Hello, thanks for that. That was quite a good shift to the normal way lectures are delivered. Actually, it's you've given me some food for thought that hadn't ever occurred to me before. So I've probably not got it fully formed in my brain yet. But I'd like to ask you a question about, you're talking about modernizing the symbols, maybe, and then explaining the correlations and then rolling back to the older ones later. So I know I've simplified your statement there, but just to try and deliver my thought process for you then to later in more detail and more depth. It occurred to me that there's been a lot of changes in Freemasonry over the years. I think it's more than a hypothesis, even if it's not necessarily proven to be true. We're blatantly Old Testament base, but then we had a lot of New Testament requirements that seem to be dropping out. We seem to have lost all our Noahite stuff, which was definitely earlier, possibly even some Enochian stuff. Do you think that exactly what you're saying was somebody changing from the original delivery of the stories and what they was trying to convey, and almost modernizing it, and we've now lost it over a few hundred years, whereby we've stopped modernizing?
Okay, again, I probably explained something badly, I'm sorry. I'm not saying to change the symbols in the degree work at all. What I'm saying is actually the opposite. Keep the old symbols. Absolutely keep, but if the guy's not getting it, mentor the student, hey, look, you know what this is the modern version. Think of it this way. If this isn't getting through, think of it this way, and then take the mentor taking the student, say, okay, this is the modern version. If you don't get this is a modern version, but this is a symbol we're using because it's got boom, 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 and use. But if there's misunderstanding, use modern symbols to try to better explain it. But I'm actually arguing against modernizing our degree work, the symbols used in the degree work, because I do think there is something to be said for what you're saying. I don't know enough about the evolution of the degrees. I mean, the Noahide stuff, I think it's still in publication through the Grand College of Rites over in America. A lot of those degree systems just fell out of use. So you have a lot of that going on. The Enochian stuff, I don't think, and again, there's probably somebody out there. No, I know there's somebody out there that knows a lot more than me on this. And so I could be very wrong. The Enochian stuff, I don't think we touched John Dee's Enochian stuff. However, I do believe his mathematical stuff, his hieroglyphic monad, hieroglyphic monad is important to us. That's got value to us as Masons, not so much the Enochian stuff. But again, I could be wrong. If somebody knows, please correct me. Does that answer your
It
question?
does, yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Philippe.
Last question, Philippe, Alexis, then we sum up. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, this is Philip. Hey, John. Great lecture. Thank you for that. I work in Spain, and I wanted to ask you about that personal aspect of things, because a lot of time we hear, you know, we are family, we are brothers, and so forth. But based on my own experience, for about like 4 to 5 years in a lodge, it would really be a hard time for me knowing exactly where each of the brothers live, you know, and what address. And I know just like the basic stuff. I would like to know your opinion on to what extent do you really think we should be involved in the personal relations, so to speak, with others within the lodge? Because as I said, from my experience, it's kind of difficult. Thank you.
Okay. It should be natural. You know, it's a natural thing. And this is where I've picked up a personal thing for smaller lodges. My lodge here, 25 guys. We know each other, you know. We're on, Eastern Europe has a thing called Viber. It's like what's up in Western Europe. We're on Viber all the time. It's very difficult to do it in a larger lodge. Like my mother lodge that was before DC Gregor, I think we had about 180 guys when it closed. I probably knew about 15, 20, 25 of those guys. That's one extreme, you know. That I don't think is a good thing, where you don't know basically. I mean, I'm saying I knew them. I didn't say we were close, you know. I was close to some, we were close to each other, but what about the other 170 guys that I didn't even know at all? That's one extreme, and I don't think that's a good thing to have. But I think it should be natural and organic. These are my brothers. You get to know each other. You go to the ball games, go to the barbecue, whatever. That's what that's there for. What develops out of that, whatever it is. Of course, you're going to be closer to some guys than others. Yeah, that's life. You know, and there are going to be some guys that, quite honestly, on a very human level, you can't stand. You know, but as long as we know how, we don't have to. There's an old thing I learned years ago. You don't have to like everybody, but you got to love everybody. If we can love everybody as each other as brothers, we can work on liking each other. Some will, yeah, some won't, you know, but if we can love each other, that's the important part. Because yeah, you're right. There are guys that, you know, you can't ask them for a piece of Kleenex. But then there are guys that'll give you a shirt off your back. I mean, we have all kinds of characters, you know, and again, you know, moving forward, of course, that's why you want to be picky on who you're letting in. You want to know who you're getting in. And if you guys get along, you know, as much as possible, of course, you learn more over time, and that's life. I understand that, but you want to try to catch that on the front end as much as possible, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Great. John, once again, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And of course, we have our winners from our mug contest. Brother is Brian Randall and David Green. I got Brian's details. David, if you could please punch in the chat your details so we can send you the mug. John, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Brethren, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. We still have not, we're waiting on some final confirmations for next week's meeting. You will be duly, everybody will be duly notified of our speaker as soon as we have confirmation. So looking forward to seeing you all next week. Sorry, Brother Edward, would you like to ask something?
Just to point out something to John, in the UGLE book, my book of constitutions anyway, you have to make the lodge secretary aware of the fact that you're going to vote against somebody and the reason why before the vote takes place. Now,
Really?
really, yes. And that's a matter of confidence, and it's a matter that if the guy's going to turn up on the night, then you know, he's going to get voted against. He's not going to feel very nice about it, you know. So that's the way that we feel about it in England, as far as I know. It's a very old book of constitutions that I've got, so you know, I'm just going by that. How do you respond to that?
Every jurisdiction's got its own thing.
Yeah.
I mean, because like I said, we're all from all over the world. We all have different cultural adaptations. I mean, for example, I used to be a USDOL investigator. Okay. I couldn't talk about cases I had, period.
That's right.
You know, active cases, you know.
Yep.
So if I happened to see a guy's application to join and say, oh, I couldn't say anything for the integrity of the investigation, you know, under American law. But again, that's American law, which again, laws are different than over here or in England for that matter, you know.
United Ground
So
Lodge, United Ground Lodge suggested that before you vote for him and meet him in a committee meeting, is to socialize with the guy who's coming in.
Of course.
Meet
That's
everybody outside the lodge, outside the committee meeting.
Yes, of course. I mean, I go into a lot of that in the book. There just wasn't time for it tonight. I try to cut this down as much as possible. No,
Yes.
I mean, no. I'm not trying to dodge
No.
remark here. No, I mean, this is the reality.
Yeah.
Great. Let's have our brother Wito ask the last question, and then everybody can go on to their other obligations. So, brother Wito.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting lecture. Particularly the fact that you said that every country has its own culture, every constitution has its own rules. We're quite privileged. I'm in Malaga, Spain, and we're working under the AASR, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rites, although I'm also a member of an emulation lodge here. But we have 12 different nationalities because there's a melting pot of cultures here. What we have found in the lodge is that because we're pretty proactive, and don't forget, there are not a lot of long-term relationships where you say, well, I've known this guy for 20 years or 30 years, and therefore I can vouch for him. It is the opposite. People come and go here. Opportunists come over here. People stay here, go back to their own country. And of course, there's a core like myself. I've lived here for over 20 years that have made this our permanent home. Our emphasis has been very much on Freemasonry as a tool for self-improvement. Yeah, you come to the lodge to seek light and knowledge. And so we had an enormous influx of young people that have become Masons, where it was very difficult to vet them. But by good interviewing techniques, I think we protected the lodge. And we have grown from a lodge that was about to lower its columns 8 years to a healthy lodge of 20 brothers now and 12 nationalities. And that brings me to the point. What is your opinion about the fact that we as Masons, Freemasons and lodges should modernize ourselves in making it attractive, thinking what are today younger men? That is the future of Masonry. Yeah, I'm an old guy of 65, but what are the younger men, yeah, of 25, 30, or in the early 40s? What are they looking for? And start to think more from their perspective. And then what we have found is that Masonry is a fantastic organization to be part of. But instead of looking inwards, to look outwards in order to create more interest in the craft. And what is your opinion on that?
Well, again, it's a both and. Of course, you're right. I mean, we got to look at what they need, want and also need both. What they're looking for in life, like you said. But at the same time, there are things we got to hold on to because that's our character, that's our identity. In order is a niche order, whether it's Freemasonry, Martinism, Rosicrucianism, Knights of Columbus, whatever. We all have our own little niches. Okay. So we have to maintain a certain fidelity to what we have to maintain fidelity to what we come from because that's what we are as Masons. If we change what we are, we're not doing a service to the guys whose mentality does gyrate over towards us because we're not for everybody. We're just not. No more than Rotary. No, okay, we have an esoteric aspect Rotary doesn't have. Okay, let's at least keep with the same thing. There's Martinism out there. There's Rosicrucianism. There's Knights of Columbus for the Catholic guys. There's modern Templary, imitative, of course, but they have their own thing going on. All these groups address different mentalities and attitudes. Yeah, we have to go out and see what the young guys are looking for and they want. But we also have to remain true to what we are. Otherwise, we'll be doing a disservice to them. Again, it goes back to maintain the old symbols, maintain the old ritual work, absolutely maintain it. But mentor to student, okay, you don't get what this thing is. This is how I'm explaining it. Modernize how we're talking to each other, but keep the old that enshrines our timeless values. If that makes sense.
Right. Great. Brethren, as we seem to have to our approaching 7 o'clock, I'd like to thank you all for being with us tonight, to bid you farewell, and to and look forward to see you all again and happily meet in 1 week. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
You can unmute yourselves to.
Thanks.
Everyone, good night.
Thanks for listening.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, and thank you very much for listening to
Be
me.
safe and be healthy.
Good night.
Good night. Hola, Edmond.
Hola, ¿cómo están?
Brethren.
Jorgito,
¿Cómo está, hermano querido?
bien, bien, hablamos.
Por lo menos,
Chao, chao.
por lo menos te veo en Londres. I am Jorge Balcázar from Bolivia. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you for a good lecture. Thank you much.
Thank you, brothers. Good night.
Good night and God bless.